everyone, miss you all. I'm going to be reading from The World's Worst Teachers by David Walliams, and I'm going to be reading Mr. Phobe's Fear. Not all of the world's worst teachers are villains. Some are just very, very, very bad teachers. This is the story of a very, very, very bad teacher. A teacher so bad, in fact, that he never ever taught. A teacher who doesn't teach? What is this nonsense? Please let me explain. Mr. Phobe was a head teacher. Mr. Phobe was in many ways a model teacher with his rectangular glasses, neatly combed hair, not too big and not too small moustache, pressed white shirt, striped club tie, pocket square, a smart grey three-piece suit, matching socks, and highly polished shoes. However, Mr. Phobe had a fear, a frightful fear that made his hair stand up, his eyes water, his teeth chatter, his ears pop, throat tighten, nostrils flare, stomach churn, elbows burn, hands shake, hands sweat, feet curl, and his knees knock. It was a fear so huge that when Mr. Phobe was confronted with it, he would scream the school down. Ah! Then he would run and hide. The headmaster had hiding places all over the school, under his desk, in the cleaning cupboard, behind some books on a shelf in the library, up a climbing frame, in the trophy cabinet, inside a tuba, inside the lost property basket under some smelly socks, pong, under the dinner's lady's apron, under a pile of leaves, inside a drawer. Mr. Phobe would do absolutely anything to get away from what terrified him the most. So what was he so scared of? I will tell you. Children. That's right, the headmaster had a terrible fear of children. Children just like you. But how could this be? A teacher scared of children? Surely it is the other way round. Children should be terrified of teachers. Not in this case. Please let me take you back in time, 50 years ago, to the day when the story begins. It was Mr. Phobe's very first day as a teacher. He was just 21, fresh out of teacher training college, and ready to take on the world. Mr. Phobe started as supply teacher, which is stepping in at a school when one of their teachers is off sick, or, more likely, had been driven bananas by the pupils. Little did he know that on his very first day of work, the young Mr. Phobe was being sent to the school with the worst behaved children in the entire world. Hell's Bells School for Horrible Boys. At this school, if you could be called a school, it was more like a prison, one where the prisons were in charge. The pupils ran riot. There were food fights every lunchtime in the dining hall, splat. Running battles in the sport hall, bish bash bosh. Explosions in the science block, kerboom. Football games in the classroom, smash. Paint splattered all over the art room, splosh. Clumps of wet bog roll stuck to the ceiling of the toilet, splut. Heavy metal blaring from the music room, dum dum dum. Skateboard races in the corridors, whiz. A crocodile that had borrowed from the local zoo, lurking in the pond, snap. Food trays used as sledges on the stairs, clunk, clunk, clunk. And dinner ladies tied to goalposts. Help! Needless to say, teachers didn't last long at Hell's Bells. The average length of time any of them stayed at the school was 2 days. 2 days were enough to have any teacher running for the hills. The horror, they would cry as they fled. As well they might. The young Mr. Phobe knew nothing about the terrible reputation of Hell's Bells. All he knew when he woke up in the morning and received the telephone call was that he was replacing Mr. Mildmanner. He was a history teacher who had mysteriously disappeared on a rare Hell's Bells school visit to a medieval castle. Mr. Mildmanner was found 10 years later in rags with a long white beard, locked in the castle dungeon. He had survived by eating cockroaches. That fateful morning, Mr. Phobe marched confidently into the history classroom at Hell's Bells. His shiny new briefcase was swinging in his hand. His rolled-up umbrella was tucked under his arm, and he was humming a happy tune to himself. Da-da-da-da-dee. This was what all those years of hard work at college had been leading up to. Mr. Phobe was now a fully qualified teacher. He was ready to change lives, shape minds, be a role model to generations of children. The teacher took a deep breath, smiled broadly, and flung open the classroom door. The poor man hadn't even uttered a word when a bucket of custard fell from the top of the door, clatter, splat. Now not only was he covered from head to toe in thick yellow goo, but he had 30 terrors pointing at him, laughing at him. Ha ha ha! The Hellsbells boys were startling to behold. It was as if they'd been living wild in the jungle all their lives, having been looked after by a troop of apes. Hair was long and unwashed. Long trousers had been torn into shorts. Knees were scabbed, shoes were scuffed, shirts were grubby and ripped, ties were tied around the heads, glasses were cracked, blazers had been abandoned, eyes were blackened, teeth were missing. Poor Mr. Phobe felt like bursting into floods of tears at being coated in custard, but he decided it was best not to react. That was exactly what those monsters wanted, to see their latest victim cry or shout or run straight back out of the classroom. So Mr. Phobe decided to completely ignore what had just happened. He marched over to the chalkboard, squelch, 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 and turned to face the class. "Good morning," he began. No, he thought. His voice had come out all high and wavery when he was so nervous. Just when a toilet plunger zoomed through the air, whiz, and hit him bang on the forehead, plunk. The boys rocked with laughter. Ha ha ha! Again, Mr. Phobe chose to ignore this. The new teacher carried on as if it were perfectly normal for him to be about to begin a lesson coated in custard with a toilet plunger stuck to his forehead. Calmly, he put down his briefcase and picked up a piece of chalk. Noticing the blackboard was awash with the rudest words known to man, plunter, mogwash, hoodie-woody, tubal, wob, boontang, pommybot, minky-poo, fripper. He quickly rubbed them off, rub, rub, rub. Next, the teacher began chalking his name on the board. Because he was so nervous, his hand was wobbling, wibble, wobble, wabble. The chalk was tapping against the board, tap-tip-top. It was impossible to keep his hand steady. So, instead of writing Mr. Phobe, he'd actually scored something entirely different. Mrs. Foo. As soon as Mr. Phobe turned around and revealed what he'd scrawled on the board, the brutes hooted with laughter. Ha ha ha! This was immediately followed by calls of, "Good morning, Mrs. Foo!" Ha ha ha! Being children, they found this hilarious because it sounded a lot like poo. And for some reason, poo is always, always, always funny. Thank goodness, as I've made a career out of poo jokes. Little did Mr. Phobe know that his ordeal at the hands of Hellsbells boys was only the beginning. Now, today, I am taking over from Mr. The teacher's nerves were getting the better of him. The poor man couldn't get his words out. "Mr. Meatballs," suggested Mungo, the gobbiest one at the back of the class. "Ha ha ha! No, Mr. Monkey Doo-Doo?" asked Doobie, the next gobbiest one near the back of the class. "Ha ha ha! No, Mr. Mardy Bum," said another.